world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, November 3rd. As you are listening to this, of course, we got a lot to talk about. Now, we are in day 34 of this government shutdown, one away from tying the record for longest government shutdown. That would come tomorrow. Now, the Senate is supposed to be back in session today, and I don't expect them to pass anything today to end the government shutdown. Now, before we get into the government shutdown, I want to talk about ignorance. And ignorance really must be bliss for MAGA. I had to block another MAGA from one of my comment sections. Why? Because they, of course, come in, try to tell me with no facts that everything I said was wrong, that I'm lying about everything, and that they know what's really going on. That the $1 trillion in return of money to Medicaid is all going to illegal immigrants, and that Democrats aren't out to help American people, that the Democrats caused the shutdown, the Democrats could end the shutdown, and that the Democrats aren't out there working for American people. None of that is true. Okay, did the Democrats actually cause the shutdown? No, not in full. Did they have a hand in it? Sure, I'll say they had a hand in it, but not in full. They had their part, which was they used the filibuster, which Republicans love to use, to block the CR that the House passed. Now, Republicans like this MAGA troll that came into my comment section love to come out and say, well, it was a clean CR. The Democrats should just pass it. It is not a traditional clean CR. If it was, they would be funding the government at the same levels they funded in March. I think I talk about this on every podcast, but that's the truth. Simple fact is, between March and now, after they passed a clean CR, the Republicans, with no Democratic support, passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. That's their name for it. That's the official name of the bill. And that is where they cut $1 trillion from Medicaid. They added work requirements, additional work requirements to the food stamp program. They said if you are a parent and you have a child over 14 but still under 18 and you're on food stamps, you need to go back to work. You need to work at least something. Doesn't matter the rest of it, you know. Now, if you have younger children beyond that, I think you're still okay. But if that is your youngest, whereas before, prior to the passing of the One Big Beautiful Bill, they kept funding the food stamp program with continuing resolutions like they did in March, like they did all through the Biden administration. And they didn't push for those things. They did it now because they had complete control and they could get away with it. So they changed the way things were going to work. It is not a true clean CR. Like I said, if it was, they would be funding the government at March levels. They're not. They're funding it at post One Big Beautiful Bill levels, which includes $1 trillion cut to Medicaid. Now let's tackle one of the other things this guy said. He said that, they were going to give $1 trillion to illegal immigrants. Again, not the case. That $1 trillion in Medicaid money is going to predominantly go to red states, Republican-led states. Why? Because most Republican states are taker states, which means for every dollar they kick in to the federal government, they get more than $1 back in aid money to their residents. Whereas most democratically led states, most blue states, are donor states, where for every dollar they kick into the federal coffers, they get less than $1 back. because they don't need as much government assistance. But a lot of Republicans, a lot of MAGA are convinced that the only people going to be hurt by the cuts to these programs are the people they don't like. They have been told for decades that, oh, you have food stamps? Well, you actually qualify. But that person over there, that minority person, they don't qualify. They're taking advantage of the system. They need to work harder. They need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. But you're not one of the ones we're targeting. The programs don't work like that. They go based off of income and number of dependents. Period. It doesn't matter where what race you are in order to get those benefits. And it shouldn't matter, despite some people believing to the contrary, about whether or not you are a single mother, single father. If you have dependents, it should be the same across the board. Now, with that being said, this guy he then went on and says, well, maybe you should write your scripts out and say, well, if any of it seems like an opinion to you, maybe you should delete it because that's not fact. Most of what I say is fact. You don't like it, so they consider it an opinion. They believe whatever bullshit Fox News regurgitates to them, and then they all run to comment sections and on videos because they can't leave well enough alone. They have to go after people on the other side of the aisle. I think because they're afraid that their policies are going to hurt them. They are loud and they're often wrong. But they come into comment sections and they relieve those same talking points that Fox News has told them. Now, when those same people do not get their SNAP money because Donald Trump is refusing to fund it, they're going to scream and holler, why didn't I get my SNAP money? Some of them don't realize that food stamps, SNAP, and EBT are all the same thing. Some of them believe they are two separate programs, three separate programs. That, oh, well, we're cutting off food stamps, but you're not on that, you're on SNAP, so you're safe. They're not different. But see, these Republicans, they get told things. Well, like Fox News will tell them on one hand, good things about the Affordable Care Act, especially now that it's kind of popular and people actually like it. They will say, well, your Affordable Care Act premiums, Democrats are trying to get you the extended subsidies to make your insurance more affordable. And they'll say that. But at the same time, they'll badmouth Obamacare. And because they do that, specifically right-leaning media, but right-leaning politicians as well, there's a lot of right-leaning MAGA voters who do not understand that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the same thing. They don't. And when you try to tell them, they believe you are completely wrong because they've never heard that before. Because their version of media, as crappy as it is lying to them. They believe it's news, in part because it has news in the name. I remember a conversation I had with my father a couple of years ago. We were traveling and stayed in a hotel. Dad was flipping channels, and he found Fox News. And I kind of rolled my eyes and went about doing what I was doing. He goes, don't you want to watch the news? I'm like, yeah, but that's not news. And I started to tell him about how bad Fox News was. He believed me, but at the same point, he'd never heard that because he assumed that because it had the word news in the name, it was a legitimate news source. At some point, we need to relook at the fairness doctrine, bring the fairness doctrine back. And if you don't know what the fairness doctrine was, it was something that went away during the Reagan era. Now, I'm not quite old enough to remember the fairness doctrine in its entirety, but essentially the way it worked, if I understand it correctly, was that if Fox News brought on a Republican to talk for 10 minutes, they had to also bring on a Democrat to talk for 10 minutes. They had to be fair about having time for both sides of the political discussion. And you couldn't have media that leaned one way or the other. They were supposed to be more impartial, but they got rid of that under Reagan. Fox News would not exist in its current form if the fairness doctrine was still in play, but they got rid of it. We need to look at bringing it back. And we also need to try to figure out a way, and I don't know how you can do this without encroaching on freedom of the press, but finding a way to limit who can actually be considered news. The reason I say I don't know how you can limit it without encroaching on freedom of the press is because we do have freedom of the press in this country. And the news media is supposed to be free to publish whatever they need to or whatever they want and not have any reprisals from the government. But when you have a news agency, supposed news agency like Fox News, who would put out in a court document when they get sued for defamation, I think it was a defamation suit, but it doesn't matter. They get sued and they put in a legal filing that they don't know why anybody listens to them. They are not news. They are an entertainment channel. They'll say that in court because they have to say it under oath, but they'll still go by news on their network. And that is something we need to look into. Now, with this government shutdown, let's get into what's going on with that. We are in day 34. Doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Republicans are not negotiating with Democrats. In years past, how this would play out is that Republicans would come to the table after Democrats made their demands, and Democrats said, okay, we want to permanently extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Republicans would say best we can do is 2 years. Democrats would say 20. Republicans would say 5. Democrats would say 15. They might meet in the middle somewhere around 10. Something like that. They would go back and forth until they get enough of a compromise that both sides can go, okay, we're going to kick the can down the road for now, but we can come back and we can maybe get something resolved later. Same thing with the $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts. Now, Democrats want to return all of it, but traditionally they would go back and forth, and Republicans would say, well, best we could do is return $100 billion. Democrats would say not good enough. They would go back and forth and ultimately probably settle around somewhere around half the money and a few years to wait before the cuts kick in, to give Democrats a chance to retake the majorities in houses, or for Republicans to strengthen their majorities. They'd both look at it that way and say, okay, we're going to get stronger in each house. Both parties would say that and say, okay, we're going to give it time, and then we'll get our priority later. But that's not what's happening here. Republicans are saying, vote for our bill. Now, there's a problem with that clean CR that Mike Johnson is hiding behind. And what is the problem? Timing. I believe it runs out on November 21st. So at this point, if they pass it today and open the government tomorrow would be the 4th, they would have 17 days to come up with another agreement, or we'd be right back where we are. That wouldn't solve anything. Now, Republicans could go around all the Democrats. They could gut the filibuster. And Donald Trump took to Truth Social overnight and went in a late night rant, again bashing Senate Republicans for not getting rid of the filibuster. He wants them to get rid of it because he doesn't care. He's not looking long term. He's not even looking past the end of this year. He just wants the win to get this funded and get it open so he can say, see, we got it done. We beat those evil Democrats and we got the government open despite them. He doesn't care that by getting rid of the filibuster, he is going to burn down his own party. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the filibuster. Filibuster is this rule where you need 60 votes to end debate and move forward to a final vote. That is also called cloture. Now, the filibuster itself was supposed to be a talking filibuster as part of the debate, where they didn't end it and move toward final vote for cloture until after people were done talking. But they realized, okay, we don't really need to keep doing that. Occasionally, you do get a talking filibuster, but for the most part, if they don't have the 60 votes to move past to end debate and move into a final vote, it's considered filibustered. It's the same thing as saying they don't have the votes for cloture. And if you want a good example of what the talking filibuster used to be like, go look up the movie. It's an old movie. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And there have been some great filibusters over the years. But why do Republicans not want to listen to Donald Trump? And they're breaking with Donald Trump over the filibuster. Why? Well, the filibuster protects the minority party. The Senate is supposed to be a more deliberative body because they only answer to voters every 6 years, whereas the House answers to voters every 2 years. So here we are. We just had an election almost exactly 1 year ago. Okay, we have some governor races, some local races tomorrow. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. But we are getting ready, and we are already looking at primary challengers for next year's primary season, heading into next year's midterms, mostly for the House of Representatives, where all 435 seats are up for grabs. So the Senate being a more deliberative body and only answering every 6 years, they like the filibuster because then they can take their time and make decisions, and they're not worried about necessarily having to come back and answer to voters immediately. Now, it protects the minority party, like I was saying. How? Well, right now there are 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats. If they didn't have the filibuster, Republicans could pass whatever they wanted. Any kind of draconian bullshit they want, they could pass. And then Donald Trump would, in theory, sign, and all of it would become law. But with the filibuster, Democrats can say, wait a minute, we want to talk about this. You need bipartisan support to get anything done. It forces bills to go through the process and become bipartisan and have an agreement from people that represent both sides of the political spectrum. Now, both parties love the filibuster when they are the minority party. Both parties hate the filibuster when they are the majority party. However, Democrats don't want to pull the trigger and get rid of the filibuster when they're in the majority because they're always afraid of being the minority party again. Same with Republicans. They know that right now they have the majority in the Senate. But with as bad as everything is going right now with the economy, with Donald Trump's health, with the government shutdown and people not getting access to food stamp benefits and people being pissed about his renovations to the White House and all of it, that there is a chance that they lose the Senate as early as the midterms. And if not the midterms, maybe as late as 2028, and they will be back in the minority again. And when they are, they want to keep the filibuster to prevent Democrats from passing something with a simple majority. If they got rid of the filibuster, let's say in 2028, a Democrat wins the presidency, they have the House and they have the Senate and no filibuster. We could codify Roe v. Wade day one. We could pass Medicaid, Medicare for all, whatever you want to call it, universal health care, day one. Universal basic income, day one. And there'd be nothing the Republicans, as the minority party, could do to prevent it. But if there's the filibuster, they can say, nope, we want to filibuster that, and they can put a pause on it and block it. That is one of the reasons why, with the Affordable Care Act, we don't have the government option, the single payer option that was in there. They initially were going to put in an option for people to buy into effectively Medicaid coverage. But Republicans filibustered it and they blocked it, and they had to negotiate on a bipartisan level, and we got what we currently have. Now, Republicans want to kill these Affordable Care Act subsidies. They don't want to continue them. And this isn't even new spending. This is just continuing existing spending. Why do they want it to die? Well, because they have been against the Affordable Care Act since it passed, even though it did pass to get around the filibuster with bipartisan support. and this was the best we could get with that bipartisan support. They want to get rid of it because they want the ability to replace it. Now, Republicans, do they have a plan to actually replace Medicaid or the Affordable Care Act? No. Their plan is repeal it and replace it with something better, come up with something better. That's their plan. That is the extent of their plan. Donald Trump, during his first term, had said for the entirety almost of his term that we were 2 weeks away from seeing his health care plan. Never saw it. During his debate with Kamala Harris, where she pressed him about his health care plan, he said he had concepts of a plan. And now their plan to repeal and replace Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act is come up with something better. They don't have a plan to replace it, but they want it to fail so they can get rid of it. Why? Because they get money from insurance companies. Now, we need to do things to get money out of politics. That would help. But Republicans get money from insurance companies, so they want to take insurance back to the way it was before the Affordable Care Act. And I talk about it a lot, but I remember what it was like before the Affordable Care Act, where you were not automatically put in on your parents' plan after you turned 18. You might be able to stay on your parents' plan until you graduated high school, but depending on when you hit 18, that may be same month, maybe you're only getting a couple extra months, something like that. And then you had to go out and get your own plan. And if you didn't have a job that offered a health care plan, you had to go out and get expensive insurance because you weren't able to get in with a group. Now, how does group insurance work? Okay, we've talked about it before, but let's look at it this way. If you go to the insurance company as just you go say, hey, I need health insurance. They ask you a whole bunch of health questions and determine how healthy you are and how likely you are to use your insurance. And if they figure that they're gonna spend out more on you than what they would bring in premiums, they're going to charge you higher premiums to make sure that they take in more money from you than they would be paying out. But what happens when you're part of a group? Well, they look at that group. And I had great group insurance for a long time from a large employer. And they had tens of thousands of people on their insurance plan. So how it would work was somebody like myself who rarely went to the doctor, they made lots of money on because I would pay my premium, the employer would pay their percentage of the premium, and I never took any benefit. So what happened to the money that I was kicking in? Well, they said, okay, well you're kicking in this share and you're not using any benefits, so we can use that money to offset the cost for somebody else. And there was a lot of people that were in that boat that didn't really use it, but they wanted it because they knew they couldn't afford something if it went sideways and they had to use it. They had something come up medically. Now, I was fortunate for a long time to not have any major medical issues. And I think I went once a year to get a physical, and that was only because it was going to make my health insurance cheaper. Overall, I was fine. But a lot of people aren't, and they have major health problems. You know, you need dialysis or you need insulin or whatever. Well, you're suddenly taking more than you pay in, and you're being offset by somebody like me who didn't use the insurance. So now with the Affordable Care Act exchanges, what you're doing is say you go to the exchange and you can get maybe put in a group with 10,000 people across your state or whoever accesses that particular exchange. Maybe you get in with a group of 10 or 20,000 people. And you're going to have that same blend. Some people very healthy, some people not so much. And your premiums are going to be reflecting that, and maybe you can get a better rate, especially if you're on the side that may need to use your insurance. One of the other things that used to happen with healthcare is your insurance company could deny any pre-existing condition. Didn't matter. So if you were a diabetic, for example, and you were on insulin, and you had insurance through your job, they could say pre-existing condition, we're not going to cover you. Or they may say, well, you have to have so long under our plan before we cover you for that particular problem. So you had people staying in jobs they hated because they couldn't risk losing their insurance. Now, does that mean they did a bad job at that particular job or for that employer? Not necessarily. But it also meant they didn't have the freedom to move on, take a different position with a different company, maybe get a better opportunity to increase their pay because they were worried about losing their insurance. And all of that changed with the Affordable Care Act. That's why people like it. It fixed some of the problems. Is it perfect? No. Do Democrats have ideas on how to fix it? Some. But Republicans want to get rid of it before coming up with anything new and just go back to the old way. That's not a winning strategy. Healthcare already is a problem in this country. We should be able to figure out some version of universal healthcare. And why we haven't yet is beyond me, other than greed and because people are resistant to change. One of the things you always hear when they talk about universal healthcare is all your wait times are going to be so long. And I had this conversation with somebody else who was waiting like 3.5, 4 months to go see a specialist. I think I talked about this the other night on one of my other podcasts. And we were talking about universal health care. And I said, well, if you had universal health care, you wouldn't have to worry about covering your copays and making your deductibles and doing all of this. And they said, yeah, but I'd have to wait 3 or 4 months to go see a doctor. I go, and what are you doing now? When's your appointment from now? And they're like, well, about 4 months from now. How would that be any different? It wouldn't. There's also this idea when we talk about universal health care that people believe, at least a certain group of people believe, that means the doctor won't get paid. And that is not the case at all. What it means is instead of having multiple variations with depending on which insurance company you have and what your plan is and all of this, where doctors may get $75 for one office visit for one patient, go in, get $100 for the next office visit, etc. With a single payer plan from the government, it doesn't matter what doctor you see. If they do it right, the doctor's office would get, say, $100, $125, whatever number they come up with for every office visit across the board. No copays. Again, if they do it right. You just go in, you see the doctor. If they do it right, you would be able to go in. Doctor says you need to be put on a medication. You go to the pharmacy, you get the medication. It's done. No back and forth with the insurance company about, well, did you try 12 other medications first, or why didn't you try these first? If the doctor thinks that's the best medicine for you, that's what you get. And then again, if they do it right, no copay at the pharmacy. But yes, your taxes would have to go up, but it would be offset by what you pay every year in deductibles, in copays, in co-insurance, and all of it. Because I'm hearing about some people who are paying $1,800 a month in some cases for health insurance, plus have $6,000-7,000 deductibles that they have to meet. There's no way their taxes would go up by that much. But Republicans like to make it seem like it's going to be this big deal. And it would be if the fact that your other insurance premiums and stuff wouldn't go away. Also, if they did it right, you wouldn't be paying in Medicaid tax and Medicare tax anymore. Because right now, you pay in to Medicare now for when you are old enough to retire. And then you get access to Medicare. And that's what is supposed to pay your benefits. If they went to basically a Medicare for all, maybe your Medicare contribution goes up instead of your taxes, but then you're covered and then it's done and you get access to healthcare for the rest of it. Anyway, those are a couple of things that the sticking points of this government shutdown. I don't know if it's going to end anytime soon. Republicans, as far as I know, are not going to be back in session today in the House of Representatives. Mike Johnson still trying to keep the House out for as long as possible. Now, why is he trying to keep the House out of session. He is coming up with any excuse possible to not swear in Representative Grijalva. Any excuse. Why? Because she would be vote number 218 on the discharge petition about the Epstein files. And Donald Trump absolutely does not want the Epstein files released. In fact, he is so terrified of what is in those files, it's being reported that he is talking about pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, that would be a dumb move on his part, but Donald Trump makes dumb moves all the time. And if he pardons her, she has no protections against self-incrimination because she isn't facing jeopardy for anything she says or does. So she would have to go, if she gets called before Congress to testify in the Epstein file investigation, she would have to truthfully testify, and she couldn't cover Donald Trump's ass. Now, as it sits, because of self-incrimination, she could potentially plead the fifth, or she could potentially, because she's lied under oath before, lie under oath and protect Donald Trump if she does not get a pardon. But see, she wants out of prison, and I think she's trying to dangle that carrot in front of Donald Trump, saying, well, unless you let me out of prison, I'm going to sing like a bird and I'm going to say everything I know. Ultimately, the Epstein files will be released, I think. At some point, Mike Johnson is going to have to pull the House of Representatives back into session. They have not been in session going back to September 23rd, I think, going on about 6 weeks now. Why? Well, like I said, he doesn't want to vote on the Epstein files. Beyond that, Mike Johnson thinks he's doing something and putting pressure on Democrats. But Democrats haven't caved. They keep saying, come to the negotiating table. Let's talk about it. Republicans aren't negotiating. So, if they bring the House back into session, Representative Grijalva gets sworn in. She can finally do work for her district. She can finally access her payroll, start receiving her paycheck, and start doing things, and then she can sign the discharge petition to hold a vote on releasing the Epstein files. Now, will this discharge petition actually force the DOJ to release the files? Not by itself. First of all, it would have to pass the House because they would have to vote on it. This discharge petition is only to call it for a vote. If it passes the House, and I assume it would because they need 218 votes to pass it, they need 218 signatures to call it for a vote, and I don't think any Republican that broke party ranks to sign the discharge petition against Speaker Johnson would then turn around and vote against the same thing they tried to call for a vote. And all Democrats are going to vote to release it. But then it would have to go to the Senate. And ultimately, even if it passed the Senate, because we don't know what its fate is going to be like over there, it could get buried in committee and never see the light of day. It would have to go to Donald Trump's desk if it gets signed. Now, he's not going to sign it. He would veto it. So how could this discharge petition play out? Well, one of a couple ways. One, they pull it up for a vote after they bring the House back into session. Representative Grijalva gets sworn in, and it passes 218 to 217, or whatever the number is right now. But just the 218 on the discharge petition are enough to pass it. And those are the only ones that vote for it. And it goes to the Senate and it dies over there. Now, the Republicans that voted against releasing it would have to answer to their voters. Their voters are the ones that want the Epstein file released. Okay. So what happens there? Well, they'd have to answer to their voter. And the voters want the Epstein files released. They would have to explain to them why they chose to bury the Epstein files. Here's the problem. Most MAGA voters believe the Epstein files are full of nothing but Democrats. Why? Because they have been told for so long that Democrats do all of these awful things. It would only ever be Democrats. You could never get a good Christian Republican to do something like that to children, even though we all know that is not true. that they end up believing, the voters do, that it's going to be all Democrats. And they think there's going to be some kind of a gotcha if we find out Bill Clinton is on the list. Now, if Bill Clinton's on the list, he should be prosecuted if possible. And if the statute of limitations is up, he needs to be a public pariah. He needs to go down in infamy in history and not celebrated because he has done horrible things. But see, that's where we are different from MAGA, because MAGA can't understand why we don't worship our politicians. The MAGA voter was never really into politician worship pre Donald Trump, because I think a big chunk of the MAGA voter were never politically inclined until Donald Trump. They stayed out of it. But see, he brought them in because he had some charisma, he had popularity, he had fame from The Apprentice, and he said the things they liked to hear. He made it okay to hate the type of people they hate. All right. So anyway, when these Epstein files come out, sorry, what I was saying was they don't understand why we don't worship our politicians like they worship Donald Trump, because he brought them into politics and he made it okay for them to be who they are, which is why they don't want to break from him, because then they have to admit what they're doing is wrong, and they don't want to do that. So this discharge petition comes up. Now, the other way it could happen, besides it just barely passing and all of the Republicans have to answer to their voters, the other thing that could happen is a large number of Republicans, enough to override a presidential veto perhaps, come through, vote to release the Epstein files. Okay? Donald Trump gets pissed and he calls up some of his hardcore MAGA buddies in Congress and says, hey, get rid of Mike Johnson. And they call for a vote to vacate the chair. Mike Johnson could potentially be out as Speaker of the House. Now, if the government is not back in session, I could see Democrats saving Mike Johnson only as a bargaining chip, saying, hey, Mike Johnson, you get us some of our priorities passed through when we fund the government. You bring our stuff for a vote, make it happen so it gets passed so Donald Trump would sign it, and we'll save your butt. If not, Democrats have no reason to save Mike Johnson. He has not done them any favors. He doesn't negotiate in good faith. He has lied to the American people. In fact, he was on the Sunday shows here recently talking to the American people, saying, well, Donald Trump doesn't want people to go hungry. He actually cares about people. And it's all the Democrats. The Democrats are the ones who want people to go hungry. But that's not true. They're blatantly lying. Why? Because Donald Trump has told Republicans to make the Democrats agree to the CR as it was and don't negotiate at all, because he thinks it makes him look tough. Okay, Mike Johnson is out saying Democrats are the ones who don't want people to be fed. Yet Democrats introduced a bill in the Senate asking for unanimous consent to fund the SNAP program through the month of November and maybe December if there's no answer to this government shutdown. Guess what happened? Republicans voted it down. They said no. Democrats weren't the one to shoot down feeding people. It was Republicans. Democrats do not have control of either branch of government. They don't have the presidency. They don't have the vice presidency. They do not have either chamber of Congress. Republicans are in complete control. But they want you to believe that it is the Democrats that are at fault. And it's just not true. So, if the government's not open, Mike Johnson, who hasn't done anything to negotiate, is constantly lying to the American people about the fate of this government shutdown, etc., and trying to blame the Democrats. Democrats may have no reason to save him. And then he's gone. And then they have to find a new Speaker of the House. So then they may take 3-4 weeks to become Speaker. And we're hearing that behind closed doors, Donald Trump is effectively saying, because he can pull Mike Johnson's puppet strings, that he's effectively also the Speaker of the House because he's talking through Mike Johnson. So if Mike Johnson's gone, who do they get? Donald Trump's going to want somebody just as weak as Mike Johnson. Democrats aren't going to vote for anybody like that. Republicans, they don't seem unified enough to vote for anybody. And there potentially could come a way where if they need a new Speaker of the House, and I know it's a long shot, but if it means going back to some level of normalcy and getting stuff done and not dinking around and treating people like crap like they currently are, I could see some Republicans saying, okay, we've had enough. Let's vote for somebody normal, and then them breaking ranks and voting for Hakeem Jeffries, putting the minority party in control of the speakership. Now, would that change anything as far as control of the House? Not really. Other than Hakeem Jeffries would have a lot more say over what gets pulled up for votes, etc. But committees would still be Republican led. None of that would change it. The Democrats wouldn't be in control of the House. It would be more of a he's just running things to make sure it runs smoothly. But it's possible. And, we talk all the time about what could happen here coming up. Republicans are terrified of losing the House in the midterms. How do I know that? Well, they're trying to gerrymander a bunch of states, and they're trying to change voter ID laws, and they're trying to talk, like Donald Trump trying to say same day voting only, no mail in voting, no early voting, and all of this. They want low voter turnout because they know people are going to probably be pissed. And when people are pissed, they turn up to vote. And when voters turn up, Republicans lose. Simple as that. So what happens when after the midterms, Democrats have control of one chamber of Congress? Donald Trump gets nothing done his last 2 years. He becomes he already is a lame duck because he can't run for anything again. But after he costs them the House of Representatives and or the Senate, and I say it that way because I really believe the House is going to flip to the Democrats at minimum, in part because there are more seats in play and the map is more favorable to Democrats, even with the gerrymandering bullshit. So what happens? Donald Trump gets nothing accomplished. He may even get impeached again. And because he has no more elections to run, Republicans may decide that it is time to walk away from Donald Trump and switch to J.D. Vance, trying to rehab their image for 2 years. And they could do it with this idea that by saying, well, we're going to put J.D. Vance in there, even if he has a democratically controlled House of Representatives, because we can say, well, see, he had a democratically controlled House. He couldn't do anything during his 2 years as president. You need to give him another term and try to make him sympathetic. It's not going to work because he's going to be connected to Donald Trump and all of the bullshit that has been caused by the Trump administration. But it's entirely possible that the Republicans see that as their way out. Now, tomorrow, talking about elections, tomorrow we have Election Day here in the United States. A lot of towns have city council, mayoral elections, county elections, boards of supervisors, or whatever you call your local governing people. I know there are some that are, it's like aldermen and other terms like that, where they're not necessarily councilmen, but they all effectively mean the same thing. I encourage everyone to get out if you can and go vote. It is important that you get out. You vote for those people that are going to be representing you in your local elections. Why? Because they're the ones that have the most control over what happens to you in your day-to-day life. Okay? You vote for Republicans and you have a Republican-led local government and things don't get any better, but you keep voting in Republicans and then things never get better. How can you blame Democrats? Republicans try to, but that's one of the things. Plus, you're going to have Some state offices may be up for grabs, and we do have a couple of statewide races we are watching nationwide. Now, by the time I will get to be able to record Wednesday morning's podcast, I'm probably not going to be able to record it till after most of the races have been called for Tuesday night. So I will be talking, I believe, if things play out that way and we have answers for those races on Wednesday morning's podcast about the outcomes of these races. And these may be what causes Republicans to actually finally come to the table. Now, which races are we watching? Well, you have the governor race in Virginia. You have Republican versus a Democrat, and I will admit I don't know the two people running. But I think the Republican could be in a lot of trouble, in part because there are a lot of government employees that live in Virginia. They work in Washington D.C. but live in Virginia. So they vote in Virginia. And now they are furloughed, or their paychecks are in jeopardy, or in some cases they're considered essential. They're working but not getting paid. And all while watching things that are going on in this administration. Now, there are rules and laws in place that should prevent government employees from being political. All that means is if you work for the government, typically you are not supposed to go out and campaign for a candidate, talk bad about a candidate. Basically, you're supposed to be hands off. That doesn't mean you can't vote. And if they are displeased with what the administration they are currently working for is doing, they're going to be looking for someone to take it out on. And they could turn on Republicans in their statewide races and turn around and vote in the Democrat by wide margins. Now, we'll have to see what the final results are. And I think if it's a landslide victory, and I'm talking 60% plus, it may send a clear sign to Republicans that they need to reverse course here and change something. And it may lead to them deciding on actually negotiating and getting an end to this government shutdown. Another race they're watching is the governor's race in New Jersey. Now, a lot of people are suspecting the Democrat is going to win. The question really isn't will the Democrat win, but by how much? So, again, if it's a landslide, that could be sending a signal to Republicans that they need to end the government shutdown by negotiating and actually bring them to the table. And this may be what they're actually waiting for, waiting to see what the voters are saying. Then you have Mamdani running for mayor of New York City. Now, I have no doubt he is going to win. It sounds like the two candidates he is running against are horrible candidates. He's probably going to win with a large margin of support. Now, Donald Trump is already talking about trying to limit federal money going to New York City if Mamdani wins. We're hearing about them trying to challenge him actually winning. And for those people worried about them trying, like the Republicans are going to somehow succeed in not letting him become the mayor of New York City, look at what happened with Donald Trump and his 63 election lawsuits after the 2020 election that he lost. What happened? 62 of them he lost, and the one that he did win was a very minor win. It was about allowing the poll watchers that were watching the tabulation of votes or whatever, like 10 feet closer to where they were or something like that. It wasn't even that big of a deal. Like, he didn't win any of the big ones on his merits, and some of the attorneys that he used to file those lawsuits ended up disbarred. So I'm not worried about them pulling some shenanigans with Mamdani and somehow preventing him from being sworn in. The courts are going to step in and say, yeah, not going to happen. And then there's the race in California, Prop 50. And that is where they are asking the voters if it is okay to redraw California's congressional maps, eliminating 5 Republican seats in response to what Texas is doing. And of course, Republicans are losing their minds about how dare Democrats weaponize the congressional maps and how dare Gavin Newsom tried to redraw California's maps, despite the fact that multiple states have redrawn their maps, including Texas, where Texas got rid of 5 seats that were held by Democrats, hoping to make it so that they end up getting more seats in Congress. And all this is doing is, if it works the way for Democrats, the way Republicans want it to work in Texas, it just means the numbers of representatives won't change, just where they're from will. Because you'll have 5 fewer Democrats from Texas, but 5 more Democrats from California in Congress, and we maintain the status quo. So we're watching those races. By the time I do Wednesday morning's podcast, I will have that. Now, between here and there, I will have Tuesday morning's podcast as well. And I'm sure we're going to have lots to talk about in there. And some of the things that we're going to have to discuss tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be oral arguments before the Supreme Court. Now, we are hearing Donald Trump now saying he is not going to attend those oral arguments. He had been floating the idea of showing up. And why would he want to show up to oral arguments before the Supreme Court? Couple of reasons. One, he thinks he can strong arm anybody by showing up and glaring at them or giving them a mean look or whatever. And if he's there, that he's got this intimidating presence and they'll decide his way. That doesn't really work with the Supreme Court, especially considering they don't typically rule same day they have oral arguments. They're very deliberative. They take months. And we may not have a decision on this tariff case until June, July, at the end of their term. Now, this case is on the lower court's ruling that the appellate court upheld, saying Donald Trump does not have the authority to put tariffs on like he's doing by just claiming national emergency. Donald Trump has been using this national emergency idea and saying national emergency this, national emergency that, and throwing tariffs on around the world. And it has been ridiculous, going as high as, I think at one point it was over 200% on China. Now, he backed off of that, but at one point that's where they were set to go. And the lower courts have said, well, the law Donald Trump is claiming to give him the authority to do these tariffs doesn't actually say that. In fact, the word tariff is nowhere mentioned in that particular law. So they're going to be hearing oral arguments on this case tomorrow. And I think because of how the lower courts have ruled on this and how they phrased everything, this Supreme Court, which likes to look at letter of the law, and they like to go, because that's how they decided, like Roe v. Wade, and said, well, the word abortion isn't in the 14th Amendment, so you don't have a right to an abortion. Except the idea was that everybody had the right to privacy, and the decision to get an abortion was a private decision. So they got that, in my opinion, they got Roe v. Wade wrong. But see, that's how they made that choice as well. Letter of the law doesn't say it, so we have to go by that. And I think what they're going to do is look at this law that Donald Trump is trying to use to support his tariffs, and they're going to say, yeah, about that, not really what we're going for here. And I think his tariffs get struck down. Now, of course, Donald Trump is going to rail then against the Supreme Court, and he doesn't like it when he loses. Of course, he's a raging narcissist. But he was going to go either to mean mug or intimidate the judges to ruling his way. The other thing he could be trying to do would have been to go up and pontificate and, well, let me have 20 minutes to talk and I will convince them that I'm right. And he'd try to turn it into a rally speech. And I think somebody finally got to him and said, you know, Donnie, no president has done it before. No U.S. president has ever gone to oral arguments at the Supreme Court during their term. Several U.S. presidents went before becoming president. They had, because they were attorneys, ended up arguing cases before the United States Supreme Court. And by doing that, they were there for oral arguments and then became president. And then most famously, William Taft became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court after being president. But no president has ever gone to the Supreme Court during oral arguments because They are supposed to be viewed as a separate branch of government, an equal branch, so that you leave them to make their decisions, do their thing over there, and then, you just go with what they say. You follow that ruling. So we'll have to see how those oral arguments go. If I get a chance tomorrow, uh, I guess I won't have it for tomorrow's podcast, but maybe also with Wednesday's podcast, maybe I will have a chance to look at some transcripts about what was said during these oral arguments to see if we have an idea of which way the Supreme Court is going to lean. Now, one of the last things I want to touch on is with these SNAP benefits. Donald Trump was given until today by a judge to figure out how to pay the SNAP benefits that the emergency fund is supposed to cover. Now, Donald Trump is trying to say he doesn't have the authority. He still doesn't think he should do it. Republican MAGA commentators are trying to say that it's an activist judge trying to tell Congress how to appropriate funds. That's not true. This is money that was already appropriated by Congress to this emergency fund that is designed to be used when there's no funding from Congress or in an emergency situation. That's what this is. All the judge is saying is the money you agreed to, the law you wrote earlier establishing this fund says the money must be paid. So pay it. So use it. That's entirely different than what MAGA wants you to believe these judges are saying, in part because they're lied to. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people asking, what can they do to help? How can they help people who need food? And because people right now are not getting their SNAP benefits and people are worried. How can we help? Well, if you have time, and that's the only thing you can do, volunteer at your local food bank or a soup kitchen or something like that where you can help hand out food to people. Okay. If you have food in your house that you have already bought and you're not going to use, donate it to a food pantry. I know people who have bought something thinking it sounds really good and they bought multiple copies of it, tried it and hated it. Donate it to a food pantry. But if you are going to give to a food pantry and you don't already have something to give that you're not going to use, or something that you could deem in excess right now that maybe, hey, I bought this, but I'm not going to use it before it goes bad. Those kind of things. Donate that to the food pantry. But if you're going to go out, do not purposefully go out and buy things for a food pantry. The reason I say that is most food pantries, I know here in Iowa, there is a food bank in Des Moines that food pantries can go buy from. And they can buy food way cheaper from the food pantry down there, from the food bank. It's like pennies per pound of food. Way cheaper than any sale, any deep discount sale, unless you're one of those extreme couponers, where you're getting a whole like $700 worth of groceries for free from a grocery store because you know how to do all that. They can buy it way more food if you just give them $20, $50, whatever you can afford. And don't put yourself in a position where you are going to be struggling yourself. But if you have it to give, if you give them the money, they can go use it when they make their purchase, and they may be able to buy even more than what you could get from the grocery store. Now, if you don't want to do that, or if you think I'm wrong, then contact your local food pantry and ask them what they would prefer you to do. And if they would say go to just either way, we don't care, then do whichever way you feel more comfortable. I'm telling you what I have seen from food pantries around me when I've talked to them before, etc., that they can go buy food a lot cheaper than the donations. But if you have stuff that you are not going to use, then donate that. Another thing, I don't know if your area does it. A lot of places have those little free libraries. I've noticed around my area that people will sometimes put food in there. So it's anonymous. You don't even have to go to any sort of food pantry or maybe even be embarrassed, because some people get embarrassed for needing assistance. Put stuff in there that is shelf stable. Maybe put a posting about if you put a bunch of stuff in one or whatever. out on your your local Facebook page and let them know. Just check in with people. Check in, if you do know the story of somebody who needs help, if they are okay with you sharing it, maybe share it on your Facebook page or share a GoFundMe or whatever you can do to help people. We're going to need to pull together to get through this. We'll get through it because Donald Trump will not be in power forever. We are going to have to get to work when he is gone to fix the problems that he has shown us with this country. But we can do it. It's just going to take time. It's going to take resources. It's going to take money. And it's going to take a lot of us being on the same page. But that's everything I got for you today. I want to thank you for joining me here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. I'll be back with more tomorrow because there's always something to talk about with this administration.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.